Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be making my complete 2023 NHL standings and Stanley Cup predictions for the 2023 NHL season. Now, with the offseason for the most part complete, we got a great idea of every team heading into next year, but which teams do I see doing the best and the worst in the regular season, and which team do I ultimately see winning the Stanley Cup next year? Watch till the end for the complete predictions and the Stanley Cup winner, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of you guys aren't subscribed, so if you like hockey content, this channel is the place to be. Now, let's waste no time and start with the standing predictions, and first let's go on to the West and the Pacific Division, and easily the worst division in the entire league. I wanted to start out with it first, though, because when it comes to especially that wild card race, I think we'll see a bunch of teams in that middle area, that 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th range, that'll be extremely close, and I think that's really where the biggest storylines will be with the Pacific this next year, because I think we have a good idea who will be maybe the top 3, and also a good idea as well as who will be at the bottom. But let's start off with the best team in the Pacific, and for my vote, I go for the Edmonton Oilers. You combine the fact that you actually bring in a hopefully stable goaltender in Jack Campbell, and to me that completely changes the outlook, especially in the regular season. But I feel like with this Oilers team, they've already built themselves very well. They'll likely have, of course, a full year of Evander Kane, who was big for them, and a full year of Jay Woodcroft, and him having a full year as well, especially in training camps, to be able to get ready with the system. And I think for Edmonton, it's definitely going to benefit them. I see the Oilers getting 107 points this next year and being one of the better teams in the entire NHL. Then going on to second place, though, and a team that I think is going to surprise a few people, I have the LA Kings. I think they're going to do exceedingly well. The Kevin Fiala addition will be huge for them. I think that defense with Drew Doughty healthy, and also on top, I'm pretty sure it was Matt Waugh last year that was injured for a big chunk of things. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but their defense is getting bulkier, and I feel like with that forward group as well, you're going to have Quinton Byfield come up in a big role, and if that goaltending can stay healthy, I feel like the Kings will do well. I have them at 101 points and unlocking that second place spot in the Pacific. Then going on to number 3, just behind them, I'm going to go with the Vegas Golden Knights. I don't see the Kings and the Golden Knights being much of a difference, but I do see the Golden Knights kind of having a little bit of a slower start as their entire team is kind of different. I mean, Jack Eichel will obviously be there over a full season, which I think will help him for sure, but I do think there is still a lot of holes with this Vegas team, and the way they're constructed with their cap situation, I don't blame them because there's not many ways you could really go about it and not be screwed, but at the same time, their situation is not looking too good, but I still see them getting 97 points and still making the playoffs. Then going on to the 4th spot here, though, and the last team in my opinion that will make the playoffs in the Pacific, and this is where it gets really, really important, because I think there's a really interesting 3-way race here coming into this next year with Calgary, Anaheim, and Vancouver. I think those are the 3 teams that are the closest in this division, and to me, I think they're going to be battling it out for that last available wildcard spot. I see there being a wildcard team in both in the Pacific and the Central, and I only see one team taking it, but I'm going to say for this 4th spot, I'm going to go with the Calgary Flames just barely. I feel like the Flames are still a pretty great team, even though they have lost, of course, Johnny Gaudreau and Matty Tkachuk. I think they have a much better defense than they did last year. Adding Mackenzie Weegar, the goaltending is still one of the best in the league with Jacob Markstrom leading the way, and even though the offense has been downgraded, I still think Jonathan Huberdeau is going to light the lamp a ton throughout the year, and I think that 4 group still without Gaudreau and Tkachuk will handle itself quite well. I see them getting 96 points and getting that wildcard spot in the Pacific. But then going on to the teams that will miss the playoffs and the order that we could see it in. Next up, I'm going to have the Vancouver Canucks as the closest team to get to that playoff spot, but I feel like Calgary will eventually be able to beat them out. Now, the thing is, I see the Canucks getting 95 points. I see them being right there and being in the mix, but I just have a feeling that they might lose steam a little bit by the time the season winds to a close. We'll see what happens, but I feel like with this Vancouver team, there wasn't enough clear improvement to where I'm having them and as a for sure playoff team, and I think that'll definitely lessen their chances. Also, for number 6, I have the Anaheim Ducks, who I think will also, just like the Canucks, get 95 points on the year. I see the Ducks taking a good next step, not enough to make the playoffs, but definitely a step where they'll hopefully be a contender for the playoffs all year long. They were great in the first half last year and eventually just got worse and worse. I think they'll have more legs this next year with additions like Ryan Strome, like John Klingberg on that forward and defense group, and I think like with the youth coming up, they're just going to get better better and better as the years go by. Then going on to number 7 and 8, the battle of who will be the second worst team in the Pacific. I got the Kraken coming in this number 7 spot. I don't think they're going to be the worst team. I think the Kraken will have some improvements, getting 81 points, much better than what they had in year 1. I still don't see them being a playoff team, but I still see Grubauer not being the worst goalie in the league next year, and that will help things quite a bit for the Kraken. But I do like the additions of players like Andre Burakovsky, and I feel like with that forward group, we'll maybe see them get a little bit better this next year, which I think is key for them. I think they will be better, but it's just a matter of how much better. But I still think they'll be a pretty mediocre team next year. And then at number 8, I have the San Jose Sharks, and I see them getting a nice 69 points on the year. Nothing absolutely special, but we know, again, they're kind of going in this rebuilding direction, which I think is huge for the Sharks. It's what they should have done really over these past 3 seasons, and I think the Sharks are going to feel the effects of this next year, being one of the lesser teams in the NHL and the worst team in the Pacific Division. But now we can move on to the Central Division, and once again, just like the Pacific, we got 4 different playoff teams to talk about here, and I forgot to put the 5, 6, 7, 8 numbers right there, so there you go. But this Central Division is going to be really interesting for me. As a Stars fan, obviously, I want to see them make the playoffs, but kind of like the Pacific, I feel like we have some clear definition for the teams. We got a couple of teams that I think will be right at the top, quite a few that'll be right in that middle, hunting for wild card spots, and more so than the Pacific even, a couple of teams that will obviously be tanking as hard as they can next year. But at the first spot, I'm pretty confident in saying the Colorado Avalanche will win the division next year. I know, huge shocker, it's crazy to predict that, but I feel like the Avalanche will, again, big shocker, be good next year. I see them getting 109 points next season, and although, again, of course, they do lose their starter in Darcy Kemper, and I feel like that goaltending might be the biggest issue keeping them away from maybe the President's Trophy, or for instance, I still think they'll be the best team in the Central. You combine that amazing defense, you combine a forward group that hasn't had too many big losses. Kadri and Burakovsky do hurt, but I feel like with some of the youth coming up, like Alex Newhook maybe getting a bigger role, I feel like the Avs will be able to survive, and you combine that star power, and I think they'll be just all right. Then going on in the number 2 spot here, though, this was kind of a selection that I was kind of going back and forth on, but I'm going to have the Minnesota Wild. Now, I still think their offseason has been rather disappointing, but I still think the team at hand here is pretty insane to think about. Of course, Marc-Andre Fleury is going to be there full-time as their starter. We'll see how that works out for Minnesota. I think it will work out pretty well. You still have a great defense there. You still have some great star power with Zuccarello, with Kaprizov, and even though Kevin Fiala is off the roster, which I do think will hurt, I think we'll kind of see a surge in their youth. I think Marco Rossi could be a full-time NHL player next year and be on that middle 6, maybe even top 6. Matthew Boldy is going to have a full-time role, and he's going to be amazing. So I think we're going to see some of that youthful prospect pool really come into the fold this next year for Minnesota. I think they'll get 107 points because of it. Then going on to this third spot here, though, and initially I had St. Louis in this spot, but the more I think about it, the more I think that the Nashville Predators will end up taking the 3rd spot in the Central. Now, hear me out. I do think there is still a decent chance that St. Louis does take this spot. I think it's a 50-50 chance, but I consider the Preds offseason and the amazing one they had, adding players like Ryan McDonough and Nito Niederreiter, and a lot of just good value options, and to me, the entire roster is much better depth-wise, and even though they didn't add any stars or anything, they still kept players like Duchesne, still players like Philip Forsberg, who they needed to re-sign, and to me, the core is still largely intact, and I think UC Saros could definitely be in the running for the Vezina Trophy next year, be in that mold, and I feel like for the Preds, they already got a solid roster, a solid base, and with the additions they made, they're just going to get better and better, and hey, again, just like a team like Minnesota, we'll see some of that youth come up, like players like Philip Tomasino going into full-time roles and bigger roles this next year. I see them getting 101 points, not being one of the best teams in the league, but being top 3 in the Central. And then at number 4, I have the St. Louis Blues right behind Nashville. I see it being a really close race for that 3rd spot, with Nashville just beating them out, but I see the Blues getting 99 points and getting that top wild card spot, being the last team to make the playoffs in the Central Division, and ultimately getting it done in that top 4. And then we go on to the teams that missed the playoffs, and right outside it pains me to say it, but I do think the Dallas Stars will end up missing the playoffs. I just have a feeling with this team that even if they sign Robertson, even if they sign Andre, even if they get both of those guys, there's still going to be some glaring issues with the roster, and I'm just not feeling Pete DeBoer. I just feel like that this team is just not ready to truly contend, and they're in a weird situation where they got a ton of older players that they still want to give some playoff success to, yet they have all these young guys coming on these solid deals and really be coming into their prime eras. And to me with Dallas, it's kind of a weird balance for them, but I feel like it'll ultimately be mediocrity. I see them getting 95 points, being a solid team, but just being outside of it. Same thing goes for the Jets. Not as good though. I see them getting 86 points, but really it's just the same mediocrity that we've seen with Winnipeg for a long time, and their offseason was the exact definition of it. Almost nothing to report for them. And then going on to the bottom two teams, the Blackhawks and the Coyotes, fighting out for that tank, fighting out for Connor Bedard. I do think the Blackhawks will end up getting that 7th spot with 55 points, but right below them, the Arizona Coyotes will just barely get that last spot in the Central, getting 54 points on the year and just beating out Chicago in the Bedard race. We'll see what happens, but personally, I think the Coyotes and the Blackhawks will be the two worst teams in the league next year, for sure. Also, I forgot to mention, especially with the Blues being outside that top 3, I still see them making the playoffs and being one of the better teams in the West, but I do think losing David Perron puts the Preds kind of over the top in my rankings personally. I still think that's a huge loss for the Blues. But now we can go on to the East, and let's start off with the Metro Division, a division that is always close, always competitive, and always a war every single year. And I think at the top, I feel like it might be a little bit obvious here, but I feel like with the improvements they made, I kind of see the Carolina Hurricanes having no reason to not be first place. I see them getting 114 points and ultimately winning the President's Trophy, being the best team in the league. I love the acquisitions of Max Pacioretty specifically, but Brent Burns is a huge player to get in the place of Tony DeAngelo, and in my opinion, a less problematic player to have for sure. But I do think that goaltending will still carry strong for the Canes. That defense is still one of the best in the league, if not the best, and that structure that Brind'Amour brings, I think will just continue to grow that forward group. We'll see what obviously happens in the playoffs, but I feel like regular season wise, the Canes will be a-okay. Then going on to the second spot though, I see the Rangers once again getting number 2nd, just like they did last year, and still being good. I see them being right around the same level. I don't see them improving. I don't see them being ultimately all that much worse, but I don't see much improvement there from the roster. I have them at 108 points, still doing really well, and I do feel like players like Alexi Lafreniere, Keandre Miller will take that next step, hopefully Capo Caco, of course, but I do feel like that will be where most of the improvement ends. We'll probably see maybe Chris Kreider have a little bit more of a down year, but we'll see what happens. I still see the Rangers getting a top 2 spot. Then going on to number 3 though, and this is where, this might be honestly my hottest take, I guess, of the video, personally. I mean, I don't know how many people share this take, how many people agree with me, but this might be my hottest take of the standings predictions. At number 3, I'm going to go with the New York Islanders. To me, if they do sign Kadri, I feel like they'll be a top 3 team in this Metro Division. They got so much to love, and to me personally, I mean, Elias Sorokin was maybe the best goaltender in the league in that second half last year, and if he's able to carry that over, if he's able to be a top 3 goaltender again next year, I see the Islanders making it. You got a much better bill of health, hopefully. They won't be starting on the road nearly as much as they did last year, which really tanked their season right from the very start, and I feel like, especially if you add players like Kadri, if you're able to re-sign players like Dobson and of course Romanov, I feel like this Islanders team still has a lot of potential and still has a lot of balance within the roster. And again, I think Sorokin will be one of the reasons why they are top 3 and even could be in the race and maybe even winning the Vezina Trophy this next year. I see them getting 104 points and being really solid if they stay healthy, which is the biggest question mark there. But going on to number 4, I'm going to go next up with the Pittsburgh Penguins, who will take a pretty solid wildcard spot in the Metro. Again, I feel like it'll be pretty close between the Islanders and the Penguins. Just like, I think the Rangers, there's not much improvement, but there's also not much that really changes with the roster. They were able to bring back Malkin, able to bring back Letang. You obviously have the Jeff Petrie trade and, of course, the John Marino trade. But I do think for the Penguins, it'll be relatively the same, 102 points and getting that first wildcard spot, or first wildcard spot in the Metro, and being very consistent. Then going on next up to number 5, and a team that I'm kind of all over the place in terms of my predictions for them. I have the Washington Capitals, though, taking this 5th spot and just getting that second wild card spot in the East. And to me, it'll be just barely within a point, maybe even tied. But I feel like the Capitals will just be able to make it. Obviously, losing Backstrom for most of the year is going to sting for them. It's going to be, I think, the biggest reason why they potentially could miss the playoffs. But I do think their offseason was still pretty good, all things considered. Darcy Kemper is going to help them in so many ways. And you had other players like Dylan Strome who could fill kind of Backstrom's role a little bit when it comes to that offensive pace. And to me, I think the Caps will just be able to make it and just be able to continue that playoff hope alive. Then going on to 6, 7, 8, the teams to miss the playoffs. Next up, I have the New Jersey Devils. I see them taking a pretty big step next year, kind of like Anaheim, not enough to make the playoffs, but enough to be competitive. And I feel like for Devils fans, for just the Devils franchise, that is the least you can expect, but that's something. It's progress. And I feel like they'll get 90 points in the year, being much better. We'll see Jack Hughes take an even bigger step. That youth on that forward group and that defense taking those bigger steps too. My big question marks, though, just lie off the goaltending. Again, I mean, Vitek Vanacek is fine. Mackenzie Blackwood has been way too inconsistent, though. And if that goaltending tandem fails again, New Jersey will be outside the playoff picture once more. But going on to number 7, I have the Columbus Blue Jackets, just being right in line with the New Jersey Devils, 89 points. Obviously, the Gaudreau addition is going to be huge for them, but I also think that it's a pretty mediocre team still, even with Gaudreau and even some of the other additions they made. But still, I think they'll be competitive and a pretty hard team to play against, which is what Columbus's brand has been. Then going on to number 8, or at least in that forward group. I mean, the defense is a big problem when it comes to at least consistency there, so we'll see if it's able to improve. But then going on to the last spot, you guys know what it is. It's Philadelphia. It's always gonna be Philadelphia. And I've ranted about Chuck Fletcher in this Flyers offseason for as long as I could possibly imagine throughout the videos this year. But I mean, I think they'll get 70 points. I think they'll be garbage. And I like, for Flyers fans, I hope that they'll be better than this, but I kind of hope the Flyers are garbage again, because it feels like it might be the only way for them not to be bad is if they're as bad as humanly possible again. But the fact that Chuck Fletcher is still an NHL GM is pretty crazy to me. But now let's go on to the last teams in the East. And of course, if you were paying attention for the Metro predictions, we ended up going through 5 different playoff teams. So personally for me, I only see 3 teams in the Atlantic making the playoffs next year. But I don't think that's a slight against the Atlantic Division. I see quite a few teams being around that 90, 95 point range, and a lot of teams that are very, very good just missing the playoffs and just being outside the playoff picture. But let's start with the first team here that will not have to worry about that. And in my opinion, the team that'll just be able to get that first spot in the Atlantic is the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, the thing for me personally is it all hinges on that goaltending, which I think regular season-wise is going to work out. I mean, it's the Leafs. It's the regular season. They'll find a way to get wins, and I feel like Matt Murray and Samsonov might not be where it's at in the playoffs, but I think in the regular season, they'll do pretty well, and I think Samsonov will surprise quite a few people, and that defense is largely unchanged. That forward group is largely unchanged, and I feel like the depth will be maybe a little bit of an issue, but I feel like it might not be as much of an issue as people expect, but I still see them getting 112 points and being quite solid. Next up at number 2, though, I am going to go with the Florida Panthers, who, yes, have lost a lot of different pieces this offseason and some depth as well, but I do think the Panthers will still float quite well, and I think it all, again, kind of like Toronto, just goes back to the goaltending. If Bobrovsky and Spencer Knight are able to be at a consistent level, then I think the Panthers have nothing to worry about, but it all hinges on that, and everything could go wrong for them if that goes south. So I'm going to say they get 109 points and get that second spot. Then going on to the second team in Florida, and the last team, in my opinion, to make the playoffs in the Atlantic, I have the Tampa Bay Lightning. I see them making it with 104 points, just being on top of that 100-point picture, and I still see them doing quite well, but I will say, I do think they might start a little bit gingerly. They had a lot of injuries after the Cup final, and I feel like for this team, they might start a little bit off, but once the season gets in full swing and once January hits, they're still going to be in that playoff picture and keep rolling as the trade deadline goes through as well, and I still see them getting that top 3 spot in the Atlantic. Now, as for the teams that'll actually miss the playoffs, this is where I think it gets really interesting, because even though these teams miss the playoffs, I think the order is going to be really fascinating to watch. But at number 4, I'm going to have a team that will take a huge next step this year in the Ottawa Senators. Now, the big thing for me personally, the reason I don't have them as a playoff team and just outside. I mean, they got 96 points. They're still pretty great, and we're 1 point outside the playoffs. And I could even be convinced to have them as a playoff team over Washington, but the problem is just that defense. I mean, they added so much in that four group with Claude Giroux and Alex DeBrincat, and that'll make it scary, but I don't think the offense was the problem. And you do add Cam Talbot onto that goaltending core, which I think does make it better, but I also think Cam Talbot has been a little bit inconsistent in the last couple of years, but I just don't think that defense has what it takes to be a playoff defense yet. And I would love to be wrong, but I feel like they could have used one piece. They could have used a John Marino type of player to add onto that D-core and really solidify themselves as a pure favorite for me, but they're still going to be a ton of fun to watch and a huge riser, especially late in the season. At number 5, I have the Boston Bruins. I see them being just along that same line as the Senators, just missing the playoffs, but I ultimately think those first few months where they're missing all these players will be the detriment. They might be one of the better teams in the second half, but I feel like with how stacked that Eastern Conference is, I'm not sure if it's going to be enough to be able to get over that hump in the end, but I still see them being in the race right to the very end. Then going out of the Detroit Red Wings, who I still see doing pretty well, 89 points, a pretty big rise for them as well, but I do think just like Boston, there might not be enough steam in them, but I do think for Detroit, we'll see some big additions on the youth side of things, and hopefully that goaltending will be a lot more consistent than what it was last year. I think that'll be a big reason why they're much more competitive in the Atlantic this next year. Then on to number 7 and the Buffalo Sabres. I see them getting 82 points. I don't see them being bad. I don't see them being good, but I see them being fun, energetic, and really just showing the future of Sabres hockey, which hopefully will bring some much needed playoff success to them. But I do see it being kind of a middling year before they hopefully take some bigger next steps. Then on to number 8, pretty obvious here, the Montreal Canadiens, exactly where they should be in the picture, 67 points, being one of the lesser teams in the league. I think the third worst team in the league next year. I don't see them being the last place team, but I don't see them being much of a contender either way. But I do feel like this is exactly what they needed to get another great pick, to get another top 5 acquisition, and I think that's exactly what the Habs should do and will do this next year. Now, as for what could actually happen in the playoffs, I would say for my top 2 teams coming out of the West and coming out of the East, I mean, I could see a mixture of maybe Carolina coming out of the East and potentially being the team to beat out of these playoffs. I would say in terms of like the 2 favorites for me to get to the Cup final out of the East are probably Carolina and possibly Tampa or Florida coming out of that Atlantic. But I do think for the West, it's kind of also wide open. I have a feeling that the Avs will be in it, but I'm not sure if they'll be able to last as long. But I could see a team like Edmonton really rising to the ranks. Maybe LA is also in that conversation too. So I would say if I'm going to make a Stanley Cup final prediction right at the start of the hype cycle for this NHL season, I would say a 2006 rematch between Edmonton and Carolina would be my bet right now. I feel like Edmonton just has a lot of firepower, a lot of fire to be able to get to that next step. Same thing with Carolina too, and I feel like these are 2 teams waiting to get in that big dance, waiting to get to that final matchup, and I have a feeling that that is what we will see next summer. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Comment down below, what are your thoughts on my predictions? What do you agree and disagree with? And also let me know, what are your standings picks? Which teams do you see making the playoffs? Which teams do you see missing? Will your team be a playoff team or not? How many points will they get? Let me know down below. And of course, share this video with your friends. Get it to all the hockey fans you guys know. Subscribe, hit that like button, hit that notification bell, and click on this card for all my predictions content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.